Good afternoon, class. This is Mrs. Barrow, here to read you a scary story from beyond the grave. No, I'm actually at a conference in Orlando today, but I couldn't miss this opportunity to share some of my favorite scary stories with you. So today I will be reading you 3 tales from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. Let us begin. Our first story is called The Haunted House. One time a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest in a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for 10 years. Several people tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by this haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house. He built himself a good fire and lit the lamp. He sat there reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up the cellar, walking back and forth, back and forth. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything was quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming from the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when it began to open, he jumped up and yelled, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read for a while. Then he got up and he laid the book on his chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking up again, step, step, step. Up the cellar stairs, the old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door opened. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do. She just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he did not hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. Slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. The knob slowly turned and the door opened to him. This time the preacher spoke quite like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off of her face, so that he could see her bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was sort of a blue light way in the back of her eye sockets. But her face had no nose. Then she started talking. It sounded like a voice was coming and going, with the wind blowing it. She told her how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said that if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could finally rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of her little finger and her left hand and lay it into the collection plate. The next church meeting, and then he would find out who it was who murdered her. And she said, if you come back here once more after that, you will hear my voice at midnight, and I will tell you where the money is that I have hid, and you can give it to the church. The haunt sobbed. She was tired, and she sunk down toward the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried her in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put his finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to that house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him where she had hid the money, beneath the hearthrug. He did, and he found a big sack of money, and where the haunt had held on to his coat, the print of bony fingers was burned right through the cloth, and it never came out. Was that not a good story? Next, I have a scary one. This story is called The Window. It is about my favorite scary subject, vampires. Margaret and her brothers, Paul and David, shared a small house on top of a hill just outside of the village. It was so warm one summer's night that Margaret could not sleep. She sat up in bed in the darkness of her room, watching the moon move across the sky. Suddenly, something caught her eye. She saw two small yellow-green lights moving through the woods near the graveyard at the bottom of the hill. They looked like the eyes of some animal, but she could not make out what kind of creature it was. Soon the creature left the woods and moved up the hill towards the house. For a few minutes Margaret lost sight of it. Then she saw something across the lawn toward her window. It looked like a man, and yet it did not. Margaret was terrified. She wanted to run from her room, but the door next to her was next to the window. She was afraid the creature would see her and break the window before she could escape. Then the creature turned and moved in another direction. Margaret rushed to the door, but before she could open the door, it was back. Margaret found herself staring through the window at a shrunken face like that of a mummy. Its yellow-green eyes gleamed like cat's eyes. She wanted to scream, but she was so frightened that she could not make a sound. The creature broke the window glass, unlocked the window, and crawled inside of the room. Margaret tried to flee, but the creature caught her, twisted its long, bony fingers into her hair, pulled back her head, and sank its teeth into her throat. Margaret screamed and fainted. When her brothers heard their piercing scream, they rushed to her room, but by the time they got the door unlocked, the creature had fled. Margaret lay on the floor, bleeding and unconscious, while Paul tried to stop the bleeding. David chased the creature down the hall toward the graveyard, but soon they lost sight of it. The police thought that it was the work of an escaped lunatic that believed he was a vampire. When Margaret recovered, her brothers wanted to move to a safer place so it would be harder to break in, but Margaret refused. The creature would never come back. She was sure of that, but just in case, Paul and David kept loaded pistols in their rooms. One night, months later, Margaret was awakened by a scratching sound at the window. When she opened her eyes, the same shrunken face stared back at her. The night her brothers heard the noise in time. They chased the creature down the hill. David shot it in the leg. But the creature managed to scramble over the graveyard and disappear in a Barrow vault. The next day, Margaret and her brothers watched as the church opened the Barrow vault. Inside, a horrifying scene. Broken coffins, bones, and rotting flesh were scattered across the floor. Only one coffin had not been disturbed, and when they opened it, there lay a creature with the sunken face that had attacked Margaret. The telltale bullet was in its leg. They did the only thing they knew how to rid themselves of a vampire. The priest built a roaring blaze outside of the vault and fed the shrunken body to the flames. They watched the body burn until nothing was left but ashes. And now the final story for today. This one is called The Appointment. A 16-year-old boy worked at his grandfather's home farm. One morning he drove a pickup truck into town on an errand. While he was walking along the main street, he saw Death, and Death beckoned to him. The boy drove back to the farm as fast as he could and told his grandfather what had happened. "Give me the truck," he begged. "I'll go through the city and he will never find me there." His grandfather gave him the truck and the boy sped away, and after he left, the grandfather went into town looking for Death. When he found him, he asked, "Why did you frighten my grandson that way? He is only 16 and too young to die." "I am sorry about that," said Death. "I did not mean to beckon to him, but I was surprised to see him. You see, I have an appointment with him this afternoon in the city." I hope you enjoyed my scary stories. Happy Halloween. Have a good day, guys.